Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Bai. I'm the Director of Programming at MCA Denver. Welcome to the second in our 4-part series on Keith Haring that we're producing in conjunction with our current exhibition, Keith Haring Grace House Murals. Check out our YouTube channel for videos of the exhibition if you want to get a peek inside. MCA is coming to you live every Wednesday throughout the run of the exhibition, so you can check out all of our great programming that we have coming up at mcadenver.org/events. We are thrilled to be able to present this amazing programming to you during the pandemic, and we are thrilled that you are joining us. But it does take a lot to put all this together. If you have the means, please consider donating to support MCA Denver. We suggest a donation of $10, which is what we would ordinarily charge for tickets. But of course, any amount helps, and we thank you so much for your support. Today we present Keith Haring Street Art. Our host for this series, Carla McCormick, will join Swoon after her presentation. Carla is an American culture critic, writer, and curator living in New York City. And our guest today is Caledonia Curry, who goes by Swoon, and she joins us today from Brooklyn, where she lives and works. She first gained international recognition as a street artist, and her portraits adorn buildings around the globe. Today, she creates fantastical, large-scale installations for institutions and public spaces, and she leads community-based social justice projects. Most recently, she is exploring visual storytelling through animation. Please welcome Caledonia Curry.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you today. And I'm really excited to be talking with my old friend Carlo and somebody who's been a really important part of my creative life. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of like run through a presentation, focusing on working on the street, focusing on bringing art out into the world, kind of in the spirit of Haring. And then me and Carlo are going to have a conversation afterward. So I'm going to get started now on my, sorry. I'm going to get started. Okay, can you guys see my my presentation? It is actually the oh, here we go. Application window. Sorry, forgive me. I'm not very technical. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the first slide that I'm showing here is a picture by Jake Dobkin of the Bowery Wall, and when I was looking, this morning I got really inspired to just like dig back into Keith Haring's life, because he's somebody who was such an important figure for so many years. He's such in the backbone of the street art that it's almost like you can forget kind of who your early mentors were or heroes were, or, just the people who created the scene. And so as I was getting back into the early documentaries, I realized that Keith was maybe one of the first people to ever do the Bowery Wall, that Lee Quinones and Tom Otterness and this big, beautiful Keith Haring mural kind of started that tradition. And so here's an image of, I worked with Groundswell Murals after Hurricane Sandy and created this piece on the Bowery Wall, which was a pretty epic experience. And then, looking at Keith Haring's work just got me inspired to kind of really dig back into the 1999, early 2000s years. And so here's, thinking about some of that energy that was alive on the street back then. And so here's a shot taken by Fail, who's an amazing duo that was working at the time alongside Bast and me and a bunch of people that were just kind of really loving the sort of cacophony of things that were happening out on the street in the early 2000s in New York City. And then also inspired by what I was learning about Haring. I dug up some really old photos. And so here's like kind of this moment that was happening. This was a street party that we threw on the Staten Island Ferry. Here was a crazy junk band. You can barely see what's happening in the picture, except to see that there's a lot of energy out in the streets. And it just, I was looking at everything that Keith Haring was up to in the 80s, recognizing like, we're never going to be as cool as they were. They were amazing and epic and glamorous and all these things. But the thing that I felt a kind of a similarity to was just this sort of aliveness and just the out in the streetness and the ways of just getting into, both just getting together with everyone, and then also kind of taking over different public spaces. And so here's a project where we were covering over billboards. Here we are replacing ads in the subway stations. There was just this sense of like New York City as canvas, more ads in the subway. You could kind of pull back the glass, pull out the ad, replace it, bus shelters, like anything we would get into, we would, taking off the lamppost bases, taking them home, painting them, putting them back. One time I walked away with one of those news boxes, took it home, painted it, distributed free art out of it. Throw kind of street parties that would end up on the subway, and then everyone would bring their art and they would replace the ads in the subway with them. Here's one where I very stupidly went over a section of the Berlin Wall because I was like, oh, this is normal, there's graffiti on it. And then people later told me, no, this is like part of history. You shouldn't be touching that. But I decided to pull this one up because I saw Haring painting on the Berlin Wall. And so I was just kind of inspired by, the sort of spirit that he brought to everything. And I'll take you through a few images that happened out on the street. And this is the moment actually that I met Carlo, or rather maybe that Carlo met me. And the story, as I have heard it, is that there's an amazing gallerist named Jeffrey Deitch who was really involved since early on and who really respected artists' kind of big and outside kind of visions. And Carlo said, "Hey, Jeffrey, I think there's somebody I want you to see." And so he took him around and showed him some of my pieces that were on the walls, just around the neighborhood. And at that point, I think, I didn't know either of them. And then Jeffrey started looking for me, and eventually he found me. Kind of a lot of things blossomed outward from there. But, working out on the street remained the backbone of my practice for almost 20 years. I just recently decided to sort of stop printmaking and stop street pasting because I really had to find a way to change creatively. And I found that like the central practice was the one that I had to put down if I was going to change. But here's a one that I love. It's a series of photos that shows this kind of crazy collaboration that can happen when you're outside. Somebody put new faces over the painted over ones. Just all the different environments that you get to be a part of, the cities that you get to explore, and the people that maybe wouldn't be, setting off to see art that day, that get to see art, are just some of the things that are such an important part for me of what it means to make art out on the street and what it has meant over the years. And then, I found that there was a spirit to it that I think can continue on in many different ways. I'm just going to pause for a second and show the installation. So I said, Carlo showed my work to this gallerist named Jeffrey Deitch. And then finally Jeffrey Deitch contacted me and he said, "Hey, do you have any visions in your head that need a big gallery space to be enacted?" And I was like, you know what? I actually do. I gave him this idea and I was like, I want to take these figures that I've been pasting outside, but I want to really build this landscape and I want to make it something that, it's almost like allowing people into my kind of dreamscape in my mind. And I want to make it a space that people can move through. And he said, "Okay, great, let's do it." And it was such a life-changing experience. And it really set me on the course of a lot of other creative adventures. So thanks, Carlo. And the next thing I did right after that, working in a gallery was great, but I was like, I need to get back outside. And so the very next thing I did was get together with a group of between 30 and 100 friends and build a series of rafts that went down the Mississippi River, went down the Hudson Rivers, went into the Grand Canal in Venice, into the Adriatic Sea, all these kind of wild adventures. And, the sort of spirit here was like, okay, if making art out on the street engages people where they are, what would it mean to make your art and travel with it? What would it mean to make your art and live on it? Where could you go? What could you see? Who could you connect with? And the final stop for these rafts was the city of Venice, which had always been a huge inspiration for me. But one thing that happened while we were working on these rafts is that we had kind of moved, heaven and earth to make this happen. And I started to feel like what would happen if we took the skill set of moving heaven and earth for the sake of building something beautiful and we brought it into a situation of need. And right around that time, the devastating earthquake of 2010 hit hit Haiti. And so some of the same folks that I had been building with on the rafts connected with a village in Haiti. And we came up with this plan to build a community center together that would be an earth bag structure. It would be made from the dirt on the ground. But because we were artists and there was a lot of artists in the village, we would really focus on beauty in the reconstruction process. And, you know, this was one of those moments where I learned so much about what it means to bring art into people's lives, and the way that, you know, to rebuild with community is a long-term process and something that really needs to happen over many, many years. And so this project continued on for a decade. And we built one community center and 3 homes, and started an after-school program, and adapted to do various sustainable building styles, and just learn together with the community. And it's, you know, it's something that's kind of ongoing, but it's also a chapter that is changing. But it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And here's another project that also started with a form of devastation that started after the Hurricane Katrina. And a friend of mine had a house that was collapsing, and he said, "Hey, what would you do with this?" And I was like, "What about a kind of a musical installation?" And then because New Orleans can be such a collaborative place, my friend said, "Hey, no, what if it was not just one musical installation? What if it was dozens of builders and dozens of musicians? And what if we built a whole village?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll be a part of that." And so together, we created the Music Box Village, and it ended up to just be something that I was just a small piece of, but I really feel grateful to be part of this kind of moment of joy and collaboration and connection. And the Music Box is still there. So if you guys are in New Orleans anytime soon, hopefully you can go visit. And then the last project I'm just going to discuss really briefly so that Carlo and I can get into conversation, started in Braddock, Pennsylvania, and it started with an abandoned church. And, you know, it was a moment in our country when a lot of Rust Belt cities were and are just undergoing tremendous collapse, and they were losing, you know, they had lost jobs, they had lost industry, and they were also losing so much infrastructure and buildings. And so some folks contacted me and said, "Hey, you know, I know you do these kind of ambitious projects with friends, and like, what would you guys think about trying to take on this church?" And so I said yes, perhaps rather naively. And I got together with a bunch of friends, and over the course of many, many years, we did creative rebuilding projects, and we worked with trying to reuse and recycle parts of the building, trying to work with the youth program, trying to, you know, do skills building, and just, you know, sort of think about the problem of gentrification and ask, like, what if the kind of reification that happened in neighborhoods like included everyone? And what if people, you know, got jobs and got employment, and it wasn't like a displacing force, but it was a force that was really about building something together. And this was a project that took place over many, many years. And, you know, we started a little tile project. My long-term hope was that we would replace the roof of the church with these handmade tiles. But what I found over the course of the work and over the course of my own life, is that, you know, we had a lot of success and we did a lot of things that I'm really proud of. But the lift was just, I found, too heavy for me eventually. I went through a lot of personal stuff in life. I had a lot of death in my family. And I found that I just wasn't able to do it, that I had started something that I wasn't able to finish. And that was really difficult. But I also found that there's a kind of a magic that happens when you have that moment of humility and honesty and say, like, I've bit off more than I can chew. I need to find a way to pass the torch on this. And about a year after just making that decision, I met this incredible woman named Rana Davis. And she is somebody who has been through a ton in her life, an incredible amount of in her life. And the last few years, I've been working on trauma, and I've been working on the way that trauma leads to addiction and incarceration. And Rana is somebody whose work is very much in the same vein. And she works with people who are coming out of incarceration. She has been through incarceration herself, so she gets it. And she founds homes for people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are coming out of prison, people who are just in those phases in life where you can't do it by yourself. And when I connected with her, you know, I had this wonderful kind of realization as we were talking, is that I was like, man, I love what you do. And it's not just because we care about the same things, but I was like, you know, my mom and dad were both heavily addicted to drugs. They both went through jail and rehab, and they both needed homes like this when they were transitioning and when they were, you know, trying to get more stable so that they could take care of their own children. And so she and I decided, and my collaborators in Braddock said, hey, what if you donated this house to Rana, and what if she made it into a home for women? And I was like, absolutely, that would be my dream. And so right now we're all working together. We've just transitioned ownership of the house, and we're all working together to get to build it in, you know, to do the final rehabilitation and to turn it into a center where women can come when they're in their most vulnerable state. And this last image here is just of a hammock on the back porch. And, you know, it might not be the most glamorous view in the world, but when I see that image, I just think of somebody who's been through way too much in their lives and who maybe has a cup of tea in their hand and just like finally has a moment of peace and a moment to sit down and a moment to start to rebuild their lives. And it just makes me really grateful to be connected with so many people who care and who are doing beautiful work. And also looking back over the Haring documentaries today and just realizing, you know, how much he as an artist cared and how much he tried to bring his work into so many places and to connect with so many people. And so I just want to say it's really exciting to honor his legacy. And let's start the conversation.
Wow. Thanks, Callie. That was amazing.
Thanks.
You just to hear you talk about your art's always inspiring and not a little bit humbling as well. So thanks for that. I also want to just thank everyone for joining us and encourage you to write questions because I'll just yap with Swoon for hours if you let me. So we'd love to hear from you people and briefly just to send our condolences to everyone in Colorado.
Yeah.
For yet another horrible shooting, and the sympathies of the nation are with you. And hopefully we can all come together and find some solution to end the gun violence. Okay, so Callie, when we started talking about how we might program around these murals that Keith Haring did at Grace House, one of the things that first occurred to me was what an incredible act of generosity that was on his part, and not a rare one, more like a habitual one.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to think of, you know, and it's just only you could come to mind of people who care so much about gifting art to people who don't get a lot of generosity, a lot of gifts, a lot of love that way. And so, I mean, that was the kind of the reason I wanted to speak to you about that. And can you talk about how that's always fundamental to your process? I know you're stepping back a little bit to work on your own life and a more concerted studio practice, but we can just see it through all of your work, this impulse. So where does the ethos for that come from?
You know, I'm not totally sure, but a story just popped into my mind that's a little funny, but I'll tell it anyway. So when I was a teenager, I used to do a ton of LSD because we were teenagers.
Yay.
So one night I don't know what happened, but I was freaking out. And I ended up back at my house, and it's like the middle of the night, and I'm freaking out, and I'm alone. And I just go, I'm going to wake my mom up. So I go into my mom's room and I shake her, and I'm like, Mom, I'm tripping out and I need you. And, you know, my mom was like I said, she was kind of a wild child, but that meant that for a teenager in that moment, she was able to show up for me and she just said, no problem. She got out of bed and she stayed up all night and she talked me through it. And as I was, just going. And I was like, Mom, and there's so much suffering in the world and I don't know what to do. And I'm hurting and it hurts me. And she was like, listen, she was like, when you're hurting that way, you're never going to solve that inside yourself. You have to go outside and you have to help people. That if you feel the pain of the fact that the world is suffering, that's your call to go outside of yourself and help people. And she was like, and it can be anything. She was like, you can volunteer at the kindergarten. It doesn't matter what you're doing. She was like, you just have to step outside of yourself and make, take that pain as a call. And I just always remembered that. And I think that, I had that spirit in her. And I think, maybe pass that spirit on to me.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really cool wisdom.
Right?
Wish I'd said something that smart to my kid. He's tough rude still. But, these ego attachments. LSD is good for getting rid of those. I'm still a big fan of that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, you got to kind of re-immerse yourself a little bit in Keith's work this morning, with your cup of Joe or something. And I'm curious, I thought it was, when we were talking earlier, you told me about how the 80s was a little bit too close. You're arriving there kind of in many ways when New York's mindset is that the party's over. And everyone had to kind of reinvent their mission and their purpose and their sense of fun. I wonder what else was in there. I remember one time we did a talk together, and you really wanted to do it because you wanted to have Ann Messner talk, who's an artist most people should know about, but not enough do. But she was your teacher at
Pratt.
At Pratt, where you went, and Kiki Smith, who's just a phenomenal artist, more people will be familiar with. And of course, they were part of a group called Collab. And for those who don't know, Collab was, again, trying to break the mold of just working with galleries and selling art to rich people and kind of doing things. And they did a show which inspired me as a kid, called the Times Square Show, where they took over an abandoned massage parlor in Times Square. And, all these people, whatever, Jean-Michel, tons of graffiti artists and all these people now who are more known in the art world partook in it. And so I'm curious, like, where, as a young artist, you have to find your own path. The last thing you want to do is what is it? Rodin said, nothing can grow in the shadow of a great tree. So you have to kind of find your own little bit of creative sunlight in there. But what was in the DNA that somehow inspired you and all these crazy people out in Brooklyn to kind of reinvent things even better than we ever did them?
I don't know if I would say that, but I'm glad you mentioned Collab, because as I was looking into looking at Keith Haring, they mentioned the Times Square Show and they mentioned Collab and they mentioned how inspiring that was for him to start the subway drawings. And me working with Ann Messner, my teacher, she was just the coolest teacher. I just loved her, and she, learning about what she did with Collab, I just thought that was so cool. I was like, oh, I can't, you guys did this thing, and they ended up starting ABC No Rio. Like, she just had this like incredible involvement in New York City. And she said one of the most influential things to me, during the course of a class, she was like, look, guys, find your people. She was like, whatever you do, just find your people and then start doing stuff with them, organize things with them, curate shows with them, make things happen. And I really heard that. And it's the truth. It's the truth. And so many times, when I've been at a loss, what's next? What should I do? I'll curate a show with somebody, or I'll organize a project with somebody, bring people together. And then you're kind of like just instigating your community. You're bringing it to life. And I would say that to people in any city, in any town, anywhere. It doesn't matter if you even have a proper art space. Just do something. Find your people, get together, organize, And so the DNA, was that, and the DNA was, going into PS1, which was still, seemed kind of new at that time. It was totally unregulated. You climb all over everything. And discovering Gordon Matta Clark's work and just having the whole top of my head blown off, like, what? They were talking about doing the sculpture before the cops came, and I was like, what are you talking about? And all of it. I mean, the graffiti in the subways, I mean, everything. It was just like, I was a kid before the internet. My concept of art was an oil painting, the end. And I got to New York, and New York was like, oh no, hun, there's more.
That's great. I love PS1 and Gordon Matta Clark. I had this story. Alana Heiss, who founded PS1, she won't confirm it for me, but I always heard that one night Gordon was mad at her, and he got drunk, and he went by PS1 and shot out all the windows and said, that was before MoMA owned PS1. They were a pretty broke ass institution. He's like,
oh my God. Well, he did that one, the window shooting project.
Yeah.
It was about showing the projects. It was about showing the broken windows in the projects. And then, yeah.
So he did that. And it's also really interesting what Anne told you. I love Anne. Let me just tell you about one piece she did, because I didn't know. It was kind of before my time. I think she did in '79, but she took those crosswalks in New York, and she kind of made an X, made two crosswalks that would like kind of intersect and, of course, screw up traffic and pedestrian traffic as well. But what she said to you, because Dave Hickey, who's a really great art writer and kind of a hero of mine, I would go out and visit him when he was teaching at UNLV before he, got the MacArthur grant and retired from that stuff. But he would always tell his students, make some friends, form a gang, and take over the art world, which was really that DIY ethos of like, don't just go with your tail between your legs to a gallery and
Yes.
do it on their own terms.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it was great, like to catch little bits of Bast in there, and know that the two Patricks of Fail took those photos, and I think of Aiko, and it was so inspiring to to people who were getting older but not feeling so old yet. It was so inspiring to us to see what was going on. In that time, it was Williamsburg, partly migrated out to Bushwick later, but kind of whatever steps ahead of gentrification, artists could find the space to work. And I'd love to hear you talk more about how that, because there's like this history of street art, which you almost have to say like something happened and then there was the Banksy effect, or something happened and then Shepard Fairey did the Hope campaign. It was really small. It was really renegade. And it was really very much a community and a conversation on the streets that had its fans and had its audience, but it was also very much as artists kind of swapping visual storytelling.
Yeah.
You could explain a little bit about how you got engaged in that and how this formed, because I imagine, just like with graffiti, most of the artists didn't know each other visually. They didn't know anything about each other. So how did this coalesce?
Yeah. In the beginning, I mean, also it was so fun looking back over stuff and just remembering the amount of energy that was alive in the streets at that time. It was, and what was really wild is that it became this global phenomena. And then it was just like a brush fire. It was just like, woof, and it took off, and it was illegal, and it was messy, and it was super anarchic. People, layered and crazy, very experimental. And each city kind of had its own vibe. New York had its vibe, Barcelona had its vibe, Berlin had its vibe, and San Francisco, everywhere. And for me, how it started, I was just this little art student. And then I was like, there was a couple shops in downtown, and they would you'd see this and that, and then you'd see some graffiti, and maybe Espo's The Art of Getting Over came out. Maybe there was like a Black Lorette book somewhere, maybe there was a Banksy thing, or like a Shepherd posters. There was stuff, but nobody, I didn't know what it was. I was just kind of like popping around, but it was like this feeling that there was something in the air and you were getting a sense. I think WK Interact was painting these big murals at the time, and they would kind of just pop out of the landscape. You'd do these big posters. And so there was a sense of like, you know, the pop shop still existed. But I remember this feeling of like, something's coming. And, you know, you just kind of feeling it and feeling your way toward it. And how it started for me is I just was obsessed with the collage. I was like, this is the best collage. This collage is the one. You can't fake this shit, you know? And I just wanted to be a part of it. And then I got into stickers and it was like, just an obsession took hold in my brain and I couldn't stop doing it. Like you couldn't have stopped me. I couldn't have stopped me. It was just like, you know, and then once there's a couple obsessed people, they start finding each other and people will find each other. Like you see somebody and you're like, hey, you'll run over. Is that you? You know, or you'll see each other at a little show. You'll start to connect. And so we did start to get to know each other. And influence each other and then we started to travel, you know, and meet up and go here and go there and do this and everyone was really interested in, you know, both like the history of graffiti but also in like how could you push it, you know, like I had friends in Berlin that would be like my thing is to like hang swings off of the most inaccessible places. Somebody else was like, my thing is to like build tiny homes like in train tunnels, right? And we were all like, yeah, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? You know, I'd be like, my thing, I love to like throw these street parties, but it's all together. It's all one thing in our minds.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. And I think the internet had a lot to do.
Yes.
It did time well with the internet so that people really could connect. I met Fail through Shepherd Ferry. I was going, you know, one time, like, who's cool in my neck of the woods? He goes, oh, you should meet these guys out in Brooklyn. But, and that was easy to do, just the internet. And
yeah. I learned my pasting mix through somebody who had been with you know, a friend of Shepherd's and then told this guy and then told that, oh, Shepherd does this. And, you know, it was like that. It would kind of travel through the wires.
Yeah, it was a really interesting scene that emerged, and it's been really interesting also because this traveling around the world is so much fun when you're a kid. It's just like it's the experience kind of on a high adrenaline of just all you take in. But I've seen so many artists kind of burn out from that.
Oh yeah.
And you just see them and you kind of like, do you know what country you're in right now? It's sort of like these bands on the endless tour. Because no one wants to say no, and you're just so. And so then to see how different people have tried to step away or work, you know, a more reasonable, healthy and self-sustaining practice out of that. And I remember it was just a couple years ago, it seems to me, my memory's foggy, where all of a sudden it was like, because I had friends who were working for you and stuff. It's like, no, Callie is like shutting down the studio. She's, you know, dealing with, as you mentioned, a lot of personal stuff, but I think it was a creative decision as much as a personal one. And it was sort of like, well, she's going to move somewhere and start doing watercolors or something. I mean, I think the original impulse was like a total disconnect, sort of like we've all been through this last year with the pandemic lockdown. Can you talk a bit, because it's your public work's so fascinating, but like your projects are just getting so much meatier. They're just so deep and enriching now. So can you talk a little bit about all the community-based stuff and public art stuff you do versus a studio practice and how they connect, but also how they remain distinct for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think of myself as having like at least like a 6-chambered brain. It's just not like I need to kind of rotate it, and it feels like everything's kind of a braid. So you have the studio work, you have street pasting, you have portrait making, you have, you know, storytelling, all these different things, you know, collaborative work by yourself, you know, all these different kinds of needs that are sort of at war with each other. But like the goal is to try to be like, let's make the big braid. Let's see if we can get everything to kind of come together and coexist. And what I found, you know, during that moment that you said where I needed to shut down, and I did, is it was like I was stacking plates on top of each other, and at one point it was like that's it, you can't stack more plates, you have to start pulling things off the bottom if you're going to put anything else on the top. And that was I was having this, right at the time that I started to make street art, I was kind of at a crossroads, and I was like, am I going to do animation, or am I going to do street pasting? And street pasting took over, because animation was like being alone at a computer, and street pasting was like out in the world. And I was 20, and I had a raging energy, and I needed to get out in the world. I could not sit still. And then all these years later, I was like, oh, actually sitting still sounds kind of fun. And my storytelling brain has evolved for 20 years, and I have different things to say. And so it was like, if I'm going to bring back this impulse to tell visual stories, something has to go. And because street pasting had informed everything else I had done, it was like, this is the most radical thing I can do. The most radical change I can make is to say, I'm going to stop doing this. And that was tough, and it's still tough. People are always like, oh, what are you doing? What are you pasting? And I'm like, I'm not, and then they're like, what the fuck? And I'm just like, to be true to myself creatively, and to allow myself to continue to evolve, you have to make those kind of decisions. And like you said, the work getting meatier, it's just like, you become a different person. As every decade, you're a different person, you're evolving, you're changing. And so to be able to honor that it means getting into a lot of different things. And the community-based work was a direct evolution of the street work. And it was a direct evolution of kind of that desire to try to be involved in having less suffering in the world, in ways, of just being like, how can we do this? How can creativity, I've seen how it can change a city. I've seen how it can change a community. How can it change a disaster, or how can it change a crisis,
Oh, that's great. I have more to ask you, but we're starting to get some questions being fed to me. So let me just do those. Nicole Polina asks, any recommendations for emerging artists? I'm becoming a teacher to support myself in this time, but it's hard to keep making art and collaborate. So hard to balance it all. Right on. Absolutely.
Yeah, the balance is very real, and the demands and the stress. And I don't know, Carla, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I always I look to women more than men that way, because I've just, the women artists I've always respected have just done incredible jobs that way, including raising families in the middle of all that. And to me, it's perseverance more than balance, and just kind of keeping those priorities. And even if it's for an hour a day, and even if you're not inspired and you're just sitting in the studio not doing anything, just as a practice, just to kind of just keep at it. I think that seems to help. I used to think that being an artist was a lifestyle thing. We were all seduced by that. And then I realized, like, well, the artists I really cared about and the artists who were getting successful, they worked really hard. They weren't partying every night. They were really working. So, I mean, that's my thing. What do you think, Callie?
Yeah, I mean, that was, my experience. Like you said, I was always the one that would go home early from the party, or not go to the party. I was always the friend that was like, you're boring, you're not hanging out, because I was obsessed, and I was making my work. And so, knowing, like, for me, balancing is often not like a simultaneous thing. She mentioned in her question, collaborating versus working by yourself versus supporting yourself. Sometimes it's like a week here, a week there, a month here, 3 months there, kind of toggling back and forth between things, and finding what obsesses you, and listening to, I find what's interesting is, even after all these years, learning to listen more closely to the voice in your brain that says, let's do that. That you'd think that knowing what you like is a dead simple proposition, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's these little irrational glimmers that are like, well, what about that? What about that? What about that? And I think, like, the more you key into those, the more you will find the kind of drive that pushes you to be like, I'm still going to do this I'm going to wake up an hour early before I teach. I'm going to stay up for an extra hour after everyone's gone to bed. And so, I think kind of tapping into that bigger source gives you the energy to do when it seems like impossible, when you're like, I'm going and I'm going and how do I access that perseverance? I think the perseverance gets accessed through tapping into the place where the art starts to steer itself. And I think that happens by following your most irrational impulses and just being like, okay, how about this? How about that? And just listening to it. And even everything I've ever done that has made money started as something where I was like, well, that's not going to make money. 100%. I was just like, well, I'm going to invest years in this and it's just going to take my resources. And then like somehow a couple years later, somebody would be like, oh, interesting thing. We figured out how to sell this. And I'll go, great. Okay. Well, I made it. So let's do it, and so the money comes after. I've found it's the drive and the passion and the obsession and the creativity. All that comes first.
Yeah. And I think day jobs are always a bit of a drag, but I think teaching is a really good one. I'm from a family of teachers, and
Me too.
and I end up learning as much as anybody I'm trying to teach, learning from them.
Yeah.
And I think you probably have the same experience when you work with these communities. It seems like you're just giving, but you're getting so much in return from these people, right?
Absolutely. And that's something that I learned to try to be really honest about from the beginning with folks, because, folks will be like, oh, thank you for coming here and helping. And I'm like, thank you for allowing us to create this thing together and all that I'm going to learn from it and all that you're going to teach me. And just remember that, you're giving too. And yeah, as a teacher, how much you're going to learn and how much that's going to influence your ability to communicate. Because the thing that I found that teachers are amazing at is honing communication, and art is communication, right?
Yeah, that's really true. I was really inspired in a way. I mean, the rasps are just incredible, but they're such a folly. And really, even the way Braddock kind of resolves itself in the end. I love the way your art flirts with failure in some way, because its ambitions are so grand, and it's kind of like anything activists are trying to change the world. It's the cynicism, he says, well, they're all doomed to fail on some level, but of course they succeed on another level. How have you thought about how the learning process of what works and what doesn't work, but also how to build in this chance that not everything is going to succeed?
Yeah.
As part of your creative mindset. I don't know.
Absolutely. The very first time I put a poster up on the street, I had thought about it and worked about it and done this whole body of work. I mean, for 6 months, I was obsessed and making these prints and doing these things. And I had this whole vision of how it was going to come out. And I went out and did it. And it was an abysmal failure. And I was just crushed. Okay, what do I do? And the answer, of course, was keep going. And the other, working in Braddock, and the moment that I had to admit a kind of a failure and a defeat, I remember just how crushing and humiliating that felt. And just being like, you have to do it. That's it. The only path through is by saying I can't. And the beauty about that is that that's when you start reaching for others in a new way, and getting into, collaboration and getting into all these things, and figuring out, where did we fail and where did we succeed? And there's always going to be failure, thinking about, in Haiti, working on those homes, there's been a ton of little failures along the way. The plaster didn't work, or maybe that style wasn't actually, it wasn't the best style. Now we have to change and try a new style. All these things again, I like what you said about perseverance. I feel like perseverance. I was just thinking yesterday, one of those great life advices I got really early on. My friend said this thing where he was like, if you're having a problem, treat the problem like you're trapped in a block of ice. He was like, you're not going to fight your way out. You're not going to panic your way out. All you're going to do is melt your way out. You just have to and stay with it. And all of those problems are the same. In Braddock, it's like this feeling of like, okay, I can't do it, but I'm also not going to drop it. Like, hold it, bring it down, land this plane, like of being like, just because I can't do it doesn't mean I'm going to let it fall. Like, about like my care will stay with this thing no matter what. And knowing that that's part of it.
Yeah. And I do think failure is an important thing in the arts anyway, that no great art can happen without some chance of failure. Otherwise, if you know it's going to succeed, why bother?
You risk nothing.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question here from Streetwise Boulder. What are the best ways that you have found to connect and engage with the communities that you're serving within your community projects?
Yeah. Well, one of the best ways that I've found is to connect with a local group that's already doing work that's related to the work that I am doing. So, for example, in Philadelphia, I did a lot of work around the opiate crisis, but I was hosted by Prevention Point Philadelphia, by Philly Mural Arts, the Kensington Storefront, people that were doing day-to-day work on the subject and working with people and maintaining long-term relationships with people, because community-based work is a relationship. And people always talk about the danger of dropping in and dropping out, or dropping in and not understanding what people's needs are, and bringing ideas that aren't useful. And I'm a big believer that we do bring ideas. We're not like a neutral palette. If I come into a community, I do bring my thoughts and my ideas and my creative life force, but I also need to listen, and I need to listen to people who have a long standing body of knowledge, because a few folks here and there are going to have different opinions. But if there are local groups with local leadership that have a vested interest, that live in the community, that are part of the community, that are doing something related to what you're doing, those groups can host you, and you can bring something, and then they can help you understand, how does this benefit people? How do people make the most of this? And how do people not feel abandoned when you leave? How do people not feel freaked out when you show up? All of these things. How do we make sure that you're really listening to what the message that the community is trying to give you? Because sometimes when you're working in a community, sometimes people will be shy to tell you. They'll say, oh, we really want you to come along. So maybe we're shy to say what we really think or feel because we don't want to alienate each other. But a group that's been doing community organizing in that neighborhood for a decade is like, no, we know that this is what people really need, and we will ask. And so that's really what I've found, is that it's all about connecting with people that are self-organizing and that are already advocating on their own behalf, and then just saying like, how can I help you? Yeah,
that's so wise, Callie. I mean, I think Philadelphia Mural Project is kind of like really incredible, because they have such a long engagement with that town. Started, I think, by a mayor who said like, well, maybe this might be cheaper than trying to fight graffiti, and
Yeah, well, and by Jane, who was painting over graffiti.
Yeah. So and I've seen in the big rush and the big excitement of street art and the mural arts. So all these mural projects start in every town across the country and across the world. And so many of them were just tone deaf. There'd be some organizer, they'd bring in all these artists from out of town. They would never meet the people from the community. There would be no interaction. And the community would be really pissed off about like, well, that's right across from a church. And that's, and that's not appropriate, or whatever. There was so many mistakes. So I really think that part of the intertake is really essential. I do want to ask you, though, I think I forewarned you, so it wasn't going to be totally out of the blue. We have this weird situation where the mayor of Braddock, who I think was getting paid $130 a year for his job or something like that, real like depressed town. But this guy now is the Democrats' big hope. to win the Senate seat in Pennsylvania. And he's a bit of a controversial figure, but I figure you probably dealt with him during all this stuff. And I just love to hear pros and cons, what you think of the cat.
Yeah. Well, I'll just speak from my own personal experience. I always had a great relationship with John. John Fetterman is who we're talking about. And, I met John because he was inviting people to do farming in the area. And then it was people who were friends with John that showed me the church. And then John is the person I ended up art trading for that house. That I ended up then rehabbing and donating to become the women's home. And so, John was really actively engaged in doing all different kinds of projects, as far as I could tell, with all different kinds of people to make things better in his town. And my experience with him was always of somebody who cared a lot, who was really open-minded, and who just wanted to see things get better. And so, I also know that there's some controversy. Different people have different opinions. But my personal experience from my years working there and my personal interaction was always, I came away with a ton of gratitude for what he did, for what he made possible for me. Like when I think about what we're doing now, building this home for women coming out of prison, allowing Rana Davis and Zakiah House to do their work. John is directly involved in that. These little seeds that he planted are still coming into fruition, because he said, hey, I see that, you guys have been doing these long-term projects. You have this track record. Can you be involved? And I really think that there was a lot of wisdom in what he did, and that he really set down some great roots. And so, yeah, just speaking from personal experience, I think it's great.
Yeah, well, I hope he wins, because the other options aren't so good.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think it's interesting that we're, with this rise of activism on all sorts of levels. It's informing artists, but I think, it's creating new generations of people going into politics, which definitely needs new blood in there.
Yeah.
So,
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So
that's really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a lot more hope for the kids than I did for my generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we have another here from Lono Mullen. Still learning about Haring. What do you think made him so remarkable and influential? And do you think street art has reached a new level in the pandemic era? Well, let me take the last part first, and then you can say what you need. It's been incredible. One of the great things about life being on lockdown and the cops being kind of told to back off on so many things is, at least in New York, it's all over the place. Graffiti, street art. It's people are. I think it's really kind of good. I don't see a lot of great art, mind you, all the time, but you don't. If you walk around Chelsea, even the galleries don't show great art. And I think a lot of it's just sentiments, like expressions, like which I like a little more from art, but I think it's reached a new level. Did you want to say anything about Haring? Of course, I know a little bit as well. So
I would like to hear your perspective, but I will just say, again, the feeling that I got this morning, just touching back into his work, was this sense of a person who was just loving. I just felt like he was this loving human who was like, I'm going to make this art, and I'm going to consistently try to figure out ways to reach more people, to connect with more people, to not be elitist, to not be exclusive, but to have this like excited, loving, engaged kind of way of making art. And I found it just totally infectious and wonderful to see how much he cared and how much he continued to bring that spirit into all of his work.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Actually, that really was one of the most remarkable things about it. Artists, most creative people, we try not to think too much about our audience. That's like, we kind of need to make it for ourselves. We don't really want to second guess what people are going to think. It's not good for the creative process. But Keith had this really incredible sense of audience and would say that, like, well, yeah, sure, of course I'd like to have a show at the Museum of Modern Art. But right now with these subway drawings, more people who never would go to a museum or seeing my work. So I think that's a really positive thing he kind of brought to the table. And I think that you mentioned the pop shop. That was an incredible thing that when art is working this kind of limited, scarce trophy resource kind of thing, you know, a whole different kind of market of privilege and acquisition. The idea of trying to make art really accessible and really affordable is, you know, incredible. And I saw, I mean, in some ways, Callie, I saw you have issues with it. I talked to collectors where I'd be like, you should get, you know, this is a really good artist. And they're like, oh yeah, I like to get her work, but I like to go to like weird benefits in weird places where there's no collectors in the room, and I can buy really important work for $100. I'm like, I didn't tell you at the time. I'm like, oh yeah, maybe you should stop like giving art to everybody who needs your help.
Yeah.
People taking advantage of this situation, but this idea of you know, that's what your printmaking kind of fed into, was a really affordable art for the people. And I think that was a big legacy of Keith as well.
Totally. And I still think about that in so many different ways, you know, like Jeffrey Deitch and I just did a show of my animations, and he said, are we going to make this like a one-off edition? And I was like, Jeffrey, what do you think? I don't think so, because I want this to be out on YouTube. Yeah. And he said, yeah. He was like, he got it, you know, and he was like, you've always cared about accessibility, and you've always wanted a way to be like, okay, I made this, and, you know, maybe now we are kind of figuring out ways that the work can support me, because that's actually necessary in the end. So we're figuring out ways that we can addition or things, but we're making it in such a way that parts of it can stay public, because that is just core to me. It's like, you know, even if I'm now, okay, I'm making a movie, I'm making, you know, animations, I still want to be able for people to just be able to like Google it and have an experience of the work, you know, or like I made a series of emojis for Signal, and I was like, fuck yeah, I'll make that. I was like, because of that feeling of like, I want to be like, yes, I will do a massive installation at a museum, and yes, if you want a project that I also worked really hard on in your phone for free, like, yes, I want that. Yeah. And I absolutely felt that spirit from Keith Haring. And I loved that even when he was at the height, he cared more about continuing to make things accessible. It was so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a struggle. And Jeffrey was working with him. Lots of dealers were like, Keith, stop giving this stuff away for free. It's not good for the market. Yeah. Any chance to make non-fungible tokens, NFTs, for parts of it?
Actually, no, that's the thing. Me and my friend Ed, who I went to college with, who started a gallery called Super Chief. Tomorrow, he's starting the first carbon negative marketplace and the first like physical kind of art gallery NFT. Something, I'm bad with this. And they're launching a show, and we actually are figuring out, that's what I was saying, you know, figuring out ways that the animation can actually support me and support my next projects. We are going to actually do a release of we're starting with little pieces of the animation, and those are going to become, you know, the originals, and we're going to put them out into the world. And then there will still be ways that people can access them, but the collectors will also have this original piece. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested. It's a controversial thing. It's obviously not perfect, but it's kind of exciting about how, you know, artists can build in royalties and all that stuff. So yeah. Everybody check that out.
Yeah, I'm going to Google that right now. I think this is great. We've probably taken up our time, and thanks everyone for sticking in. And Callie, you're amazing. So thanks so much. And
so good to reconnect with you. I just want to say again, for everyone joining, like, please know how incredible Carlo is, how central he's been to so many art communities, how supportive he's been to so many artists. You know, I just think that, you know, you talked about Ann Messner and like wishing more people would know her. You know, there's so many incredible people who are generous and supportive to whole communities of artists. And you're one of those people. And I don't, you know, so many of us don't even know where we'd be in our lives without you. And so just like, hear that, we love you, and everyone check out Carlo's work and writing. And thanks.
And I want to tell people that we're going to do another one with some people I think I'm also really excited about, you know, a chance to talk with. Muna sang. We're going to do one on dance on April 7th, so I hope people can join us for that. Muna Sang is an amazing choreographer who has worked with Keith Haring, and then Samantha Weiss, who's been based in Denver, a dancer, and a bunch of other dancers. They're going to do a piece in the gallery that we're going to see. So for a lot of us, that will be our chance also to see the show. So I hope people can join us for that, and then maybe. If you think of it, if you subscribe, then you don't have to worry about like the bad memory I have, and you can get a reminder and stuff. So maybe you want to hit the subscribe button. Callie, thanks again. Love you all.
Thanks, Carlo. Have a great afternoon, you guys. Mwah.
Take care.